The home show was very interesting. Pat Weaver had that idea that you could put on an hour on daytime and that you did big audiences. He had a lot of very good ideas. They had some budget for it, and they had an awful lot of mechanized things. They had automated cameras, and they had various things in the set that if they wanted to demonstrate a raincoat, for example, in a shopping segment, they had a thing you could go part of the circular studio and it would rain on you. They had what they called, I forget what they called it, the weather something or other. They had turntables that revolved and raised and lowered and all that. I remember Garraway visited the second month we were on the air. Garraway came to visit, or I guess he was a guest, and he looked at all the gadgetry and he said, I'll make a prediction. He said, a year from now, nothing will move here but the people. And he was right, because people is what television is about. And finally, some of the mechanism was all just sitting there unused, and it was the people that moved. The day before the program was to go, I was there, presumably auditioning for it, I guess. And they had run through a lot of people. The reason they called me was because Jack Rail was the producer. He came to Chicago. They had run through a lot of worthy names in New York, like Gene Rayburn and Ben Grauer, and people who would have been very good to be the announcer on the program, a program like Home. Every program had an announcer in those days. And either they were dismissed as old hat, or for some reason or other it was thought they didn't fit, and they decided to go abroad to find, so they went to Chicago and talked to Ben Park, who was then the head of the Chicago department. And Ben did a very good thing for me. When Jack Rail said, have you got anybody here, that would be suitable for the home show? And Ben said, he just made this up. He said, well, he said, there's Hugh Downs, but I doubt if he'd leave because he's so successful here. And Rail said, oh, now Rail is interested, see. Mm-hmm. Now Ben runs around and tells me what he had said to Rail. He said, play it cool. So I'm very anxious to get to New York, but I didn't want to act that way. So they asked me to come there, and they still hadn't made a decision. And Pat Weaver was on the set of the home show late in the afternoon, and I was around, and they'd looked again at Gene Rayburn, and I'm standing around, and I had a train ticket to go back to Chicago. And I finally went up to Pat Weaver and said, I really have to know, should I go back to Chicago or how does this stand? And Pat looked up in the studio and said, oh, we'll use you. That was the way the decision was made. And I never went back to Chicago. As a matter of fact, I started the next day. My wife closed up and sold a house in Wilmette, drove a car to New York, brought the kids, and we lived for a time in the Henry Hudson Hotel until we got a house in Connecticut. And that was a right angle turn that just happened in a split second. And it was Pat Weaver that made the decision. It was an hour daily, and I started just as I think I started, and it wasn't voiceover, I started, and by then they had evolved to having an announcer scene, and I was just out in the middle of the set and broadcast in a rather loud voice, which you don't do so much anymore, that this was the home show, and billboarded what was going to take place, that there was a news segment, a cooking segment, a fashion segment, a home maintenance and building, construction, all kinds of things that they had, and I would tell what was happening. There was a family of people, like there was a chef that did the cooking business, and there was a head of fashion, and it all went, and then a little bit of entertainment too. Entertainers on from time to time as guests.